Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Utini.
And I'm Makaya Utini, and today we're speaking with Thea Chacamaty. Thea has an MFA in fiction from the University of Michigan, and her work has been supported by the Steinbeck Fellowship, Writing by Writers, the Tin House Workshop, and others. She's currently at work on a story collection and a novel. We're pleased to be with her today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community.
Thea, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself and what are you working on now?
Yes, I am a fiction writer based in the Bay Area currently, and I've just been plugging away writing short stories for the last 7 or 8 years, and I'm currently on the finishing side of my first novel right now.
Hey, congrats.
Congrats.
Thank you.
That's a big upgrade from a short story to a novel.
Well, the first novel I actually tried to finish. I've attempted others.
How many others?
I think this is my third one that I've
Okay, that sounds
I've
about right.
tried.
3 times the charm, right?
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of people think nonfiction is easier than fiction, or some people think fiction is easier than nonfiction, but a long book is a long book. You know, it takes forever.
It does. And I was honestly always quite terrified of the longer form. I just felt so much of my identity as a writer was sort of attached to being a short story writer.
Interesting. Because I feel like
for a long
most
time.
writers, at least like most writers who go through MFA programs, they kind of get funneled into doing short stories, but they don't necessarily love short stories. Why did you identify more as a short story writer? What is it about that form that you gravitated toward? And can you tell us a bit about your journey and how you got there?
Yeah, I think I've long been attracted to the short story as a form. I find the constraints that come with the form to actually be exciting. I like to understand, the frame of a story as I'm working on it. I like the idea of visualizing an ending or the shape that the story might take. And I've really enjoyed reading short stories, probably since, I remember really liking short stories even in high school, like AP English and stuff like that. But in my early 20s, I really fell in love with certain short story writers. And I think that's really what opened up the possibility to me of an artistic process that I might want to try myself. So yeah, that's really where it came from.
And what topics or themes do you try to explore in your short stories? And also, can you tell us about the novel?
Sure. Well, in short stories, I haven't written a short story now like in about a year and a half or 2 years because I've been really focused on this novel. But I tend to write a lot about California as a place, the sort of either successful or unsuccessful attempts that people try to use, what's the word? The ways that people who are from California or who live in California, they attach certain ideals to the place. And I'm really interested in those implications of, California as like a golden place, a golden state, a place of possibility, but where a lot of really weird stuff happens, the whole film industry, which is such a strange artifice as itself. So I find myself writing a lot about that. I do think a lot of my characters, so far at least, probably mimic my own experience, which is being a person who has grown up in California, spent the majority of their life there, maybe has some artistic sensibilities, but maybe can't quite measure up as far as wealth that it's pretty required to have to live here, being of a certain financial class, certain privilege. I moved to San Francisco in 2003 when I was 18. And that was a really interesting time to be in San Francisco. Well, one, to be like 18 years old and broke and like, working in a coffee shop and living in like group houses, like punk houses and stuff. But that was really still pretty possible then because it was right after the dot-com bust of the late 90s. And so there was this sort of interesting period then of relative affordability, a lot of young people making art, making music, writing. And it was a good time to be young in the city. And I mean, I read a lot about that period, maybe longing for that period.
And what are you doing now as you write your novel? As we all know, you need an audience, you need a platform. How are you navigating that?
I mean, I think I'm concerned with platform. I don't quite know how to navigate social media and things like that. I mean, I have an Instagram account, things like that. I have a website, but at this point, I don't feel that those outlets benefit my writing practice. Maybe I think they could benefit a writing career. And if I sell this novel and I, attempt, if I can sell it and I attempt to publish it, I'm sure I will probably engage more with those things in order to reach out to more people. But I think you can have a writing community that is also more private, not necessarily like outward facing. And I have that. I have, my friends who are writers here in the Bay Area. I have friends that, my dear friends from graduate school, from my MFA program that are great readers of my work. And I think I find those resources to be very beneficial right now.
And how about your novel? Can you tell us more about it and how's it going?
Yes, sure. My novel is called Residual Echoes. I've been working on it for the last 2 years. I think when I got the Steinbeck Fellowship, I was able to really throw my energy into it. I had worked for a long time on a short story collection. And then by the time I was finished with it, I gave it to my agent and she said, this was about 2 years ago. She said, I'm really sorry, but the market for short stories is really, really bad right now. She's like, I could try to sell this, but I'm having a lot of trouble with my other clients. And I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to publish this book someday because it's good. So she said, what about that novel you've been telling me about? Maybe if you have like 50 pages of that, we could maybe go on partial or something. So, and I was like, okay, I'll try to see what I can do. Because I'd written sort of rough drafts. I'd attempted to start it in maybe 2017, 2018. When I was in grad school, I wrote parts of it, but I never really followed through. And when I got the Steinbeck Fellowship and then I had that conversation with my agent, I was like, okay. I felt so attached to the idea of myself as a short story writer that I didn't think I could write a novel. I didn't think I could write a long work. But then I realized as I, got further along in the process that I really loved living in the weird little world that I created. And I got excited returning to it every day. And some of the problems that I would encounter in short stories, which is, being very exacting in your word choice, in your sentences, in your meaning, because it's such a short form, you have to really pack a punch. I found it really liberating to be able to stretch out a little bit in a novel in a way that it's harder to do in a short story. So this novel is set in an invented town called Dodd, California, which is basically a mashup of Petrolia on the Lost Coast in Humboldt County and Arcata and Ferndale, which are sort of like a college town, and then a very, very remote place, which is the Lost Coast. And it's set at an artist residency, actually, where a young woman who is a musician has sort of escaped a tragic event in her life and gone to recoup and stay with her godmother at this artist residency that her godmother runs on the Lost Coast. And while she's there, she uncovers a mystery about her godmother's past having to do when a place was a commune in the 70s. So it's a lot about idealism, the idealism of the hippie movement, what happens to those ideals, people who hold those ideals and then they become older, wealthier people later in life, but who maybe were politically radical at one point and how they change over time. And it's about wildfires, California wildfires. And it's about art. It's about art making. So that's the book.
Do you have an excerpt from the novel or some of your short stories that you'd like to read for us?
Yes, I actually was thinking that I will just read a few pages of a short story, if that's okay with you, just because
Sure.
I'm a little private about my unpublished work and
No, take your
self-conscious.
Yeah.
But I do think that I'm going to read part of a short story that I published this past summer, July of 2025. And it also deals with a lot of those same themes, which is just how to be a grown-up when you're a bit of a mess, and California weather, climate, and class. So that story is called Real Estate, and I'll just read a few pages. Real estate. The first time I showed the house to Frank Haverford, he led his pregnant wife by the hand through the rooms like a show pony. Though his smile could have sold toothpaste, he fretted aloud about all the work to be done with the baby on the way. Is it too much? Frank asked his wife. The Haverfords were finicky, exacting clients who worked for one of the large technology companies down on the peninsula. None of the many properties that we had toured had measured up until we visited the 1896 Victorian on the woodsy side of Bernal Hill, near the freeway, noisy with traffic. The house was a leaky ruin, but some old splendor still shone through. It was exactly what they had claimed they wanted, hardly renovated, without decades of fad updates to strip back. I was a new realtor, but dressed the part of a more experienced agent. Before I got my realtor's license, I had led a vampiric life. I dressed from the Salvation Army bins and worked at night and lived off tips, cocktailing at nightclubs or serving terracotta saucers of cassoulet at white tablecloth places. For my new job, the visa was inundated with charges from Nordstrom and a high-end salon near the agency office on Valencia, where you were served oolong tea in fragile porcelain cups while the hairdresser did his transformative work. My new husband worried when the statement came each month, but I assured him that it would all be worth it once I finally sold a house. To ease the Haverford's doubt, I channeled my boss, whom I had spent the last few months shadowing. He said that to sell a house, you must first sell a dream. I brazenly ripped up a corner of shag carpet to show them the oak floors hidden beneath. Behind the dated wallpaper was wainscoting and beadboard, and all the original amber-colored woodwork untouched. It should be illegal to paint wood like this, I said. Absolutely, Brigitte Haverford said, her Scandinavian accent smooth and dull as a butter knife. She rubbed her bump with both hands, pacing the high-ceilinged living room, probably picturing future Christmases before the chipped marble fireplace. Her eyes gleamed with hunger or lust. They put in a competitive offer later that day. What I did not tell the Haverfords was that the house had once been my childhood home. When I first saw it listed on the RMS website days earlier, I winced. The previous owners had left it in even worse shape than my parents had. I probably had an obligation to tell the Haverfords the truth, but what was the point? It might have put them off, tainting their potential home with the stench of the past. The house lost to foreclosure in that last overwhelming financial crisis, my parents' divorce, my father's drinking. I had taken my husband's name, so how would they find out? The house was perfect for the Haverfords. They had enough money to restore it to its original beauty. Someone else might have flipped the house, or torn it down, or divided it into flats. The sale made me feel like a little girl playing with her dollhouse. I wanted my dollhouse family, to be happy, happier than my own family had been there. I pictured the Haverfords padding around the large empty rooms. I imagined their baby, pink-skinned and healthy, sleeping soundly in a frilly bassinet. When I saw Brigitte Haverford again, 5 years had passed. In the wake of the great illness that had swept through the world, the finer details of my life had changed considerably. The boutique realty agency where I worked had folded during those first panicked months, before the interest rates plummeted and housing inventory dropped to an all-time low. My boss would have found himself a rich man had he held on to the business until the end of that year, but everyone was crazy then. Knitting, baking, adopting, all the unadoptable dogs. The three-legged dogs are the ones who bit. As for me, it was the opposite. I gave up my dog, Luce, a mop-head mutt with sorrowful licorice eyes. My ex got her, a sacrifice to our divorce, as if her surrender might make meaning of it all. I was grateful that we had waffled on kids. I was barely 30 and believed I was still owed a great love. Though we had not yet built any equity, my husband and I had sold our apartment and parted ways broke. I knew how to be broke, but things were different now. For other realtors, it was boom times and what had once been a boomed town. Without an agency, I needed to look above and beyond money. I maintained my expensively highlighted knife's edge bob, my weekly manicures, my professional outfits. Rent, I told myself I couldn't afford it. The past 2 months, once I'd exhausted my friends' blow-up mattresses, I'd been sleeping in my white Volvo. I kept a storage unit on the outskirts of the city, enjoyed the Dolphin Club for the showers. I parked in affluent neighborhoods at night. Nobody bothered me, but I stored a hammer between the driver's seat for emergencies. I'd bought that Volvo, my current home, with commission from Brigitte Haverford's house. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. I've never been on a podcast before.
Hey, time
This
for
is
everything.
a good start.
I'm really, really inexperienced with interviewing, so I hope I did okay.
Hey, kudos to you for coming on. It's a good start.